Hi guys, thank you once again for joining us. Toby here once again, and today we're going to talk about knives. Basically, for this episode of Inside the IMK, or rather Everyday IMK, we're going to talk about knives. How to pick a good fighting knife that would be really beneficial for self-defense or self-protection. So right here we have a good selection of blades, ranging from a really small knife to a really big one. That's a Filipino blade used for espada y daga. And well, the thing I want to talk about again is for self-defense or self-protection. So the way I look at blades is with basically 4 categories. One is blade length, of course. Number 2 is the weight. Number 3 is the balance. And number 4, it's maneuverability. I would include number 5 as the shape of the blade, but I would lean toward a personal preference when it comes to that, because to be honest, in a fight, you can protect, you can defend yourself with a kitchen knife, and that works as long as you know how to use it. But some people prefer certain types of knives, and I'll just tackle that later on. So let's start with length. Of course, in a given fighting situation where your life is at stake, the longer blade gives you a better advantage. That's where bigger blades like this come in handy. Personally, if it's a fixed blade knife, I'd prefer it if it was 6 inches and above. The drawback with that, of course, is that it's very hard to conceal. Like, this is basically a neck knife from CRKT. Or this one's also from CRKT, I think, which is a drop point. This can be made into a boot knife. This is purely a neck knife, but it's about 2.5 inches blade length. So with the handle and the sheath, you can easily conceal it in your pocket, and that's a plus. You cannot obviously put this in your pocket unless you have a tearaway compartment there somewhere. Yeah, maybe, but this is a really big dagger which has a 9-inch blade length. Of course, in a given fight, I'd pick this over this one. But again, the question is blade length versus concealability. Of course, bigger blade length, better. As a friend of mine says, long knife, long life. Okay. For the next part is, of course, the weight. Now, for me, if you're fighting with a weapon, you don't know how you're going to handle it for long. So I would prefer a lighter knife. I'd give this an example as a survival knife. Now, a survival knife is basically a multi-tool knife where you can use to cut, hack, slash, start fires, etc., etc. It has weight, yes, because it's used for cutting wood and stuff, but that weight can hinder when you're maneuvering it. As opposed to, say, something as light as this one, the Tanto Light. This is 6 inches. This is about 4-inch blade, but the difference in weight is dramatic. This weighs half of this one, and it has a longer blade. Of course, part of it is the steel. I get that, I understand that, but again, type of steel doesn't really matter in a fight. It's the edge that you need to think about. With that in mind also, I'm comparing this one to its bigger brother. This is a bit heavier, definitely, but it has a longer blade length, and the balance of this is as good as this one. Of course, this is lighter, it's a bit heavier, but the balance is also as good. So I prefer this compared to the Tanto Light. So there are some options that you have to weigh. Another aspect that I mentioned a while ago that's very important is the balance. Or, sorry, not the balance, but the maneuverability. That's why I prefer this knife. It's a Bowie knife from Buck, and the weight is all in the handle. Why do I like it that way? Because the weight is in your hand, you almost don't feel the blade, so it makes slashing, cutting, maneuvering, all those small nice cuts very easily. And it's and I like that in a knife, so that you can do side cuts, you can draw, cut, and you can also do feints and parries with it. It also helps if you have a false edge. Some sharpen it, some don't, but that's very important, especially for penetration and thrusting. Now, it's also important with regards to maneuverability is you being able to switch grips easily without losing control of your knife or changing it from left to right. That helps a lot because you never know, given any stress situation, you're sweating, your hands become wet, there's bodily fluids, whether it's sweat, it's blood, and so forth, that are gonna hamper and impede your grip. So, grip is part of the maneuverability element that I would always like to consider in buying a knife, especially if my idea is for self-defense. So basically, those are the facets that I really like to consider when choosing a knife. Also, as I mentioned a while ago, you may want to learn about types of blades, the shape of the blade basically, and how they perform better in terms of cutting, thrusting, and stabbing, and doing all sorts of things. Another thing you may want to consider is if your knife has a guard. I mean, most knives do have, but there are some who don't. Now, again, given in a stress situation, there is always a possibility of hitting or slashing or cutting yourself if it doesn't have a guard. So, it really pays well if your knife has either a guard or a finger groove, wherein you know that your fingers are safe, or something like a thumb stud to control the traction of your grip when you're doing a thrust. Okay. Another thing you may want to research on, especially on blade performance, is if it has serrations, the type of serrations, and the type of damage that they do. Because that's very important, especially if you're going to get a knife that has an edge on one side and half serrated, and vice versa. So those are other things to consider. So there you have it, guys. Basically, how I would personally choose my knives or fighting knives is 1, the blade length, 2, the weight, 3, the balance, and 4, the maneuverability. Also, later on, you may want to research more, find out some things regarding blade shape, blade maintenance, edge retention, and stuff like that. But I'm sure there are other YouTube videos that focus on that. And stay tuned for more videos as we go in depth into different types of knives. Some are mine, some are from my friends that they want me to review, so that we can see on a martial art or on a self-defense point of view if these blades are really good or they're just hype. Thanks once again for watching. Mabuhay po.